kick
I've
off.
not received any apologies, but Councillors Cunningham, Merrick and Devlin aren't present just now.
Yeah.
I'll message Colin.
I was just going to say, going to send him a message, Caroline. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks, Colin, for joining us. Given that we're now quorate, happy to kick off. First of all, report for apologies for absence. I don't think we've heard from anyone, but I think we can assume that Councillor Cunningham and Councillor Devlin aren't managing to attend. I don't think there's anyone else missing. I think we're okay. Declarations of interest. Anyone get any declarations of interest? No, thank you. Moving on then to item 3 in the agenda. The Joint Consultative Committee report, first tier, and the minute of the meeting on the 10th of February. The minute is attached. Are there any issues with that? Or are we happy to note that for the papers? Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 4 on the agenda, Revenue Budget Monitoring Outturn Report. And Margaret, I assume you're covering that.
Yes, that's right. This time it's the last revenue monitoring report of 21-22, and it monitors the income and expenditure against budget for the period up to the end of January this year. So on the basis of the information and taking account of the forecast council tax collection, a year-end operational underspend of 1.788 million, or just over 0.6% of the annual budget, is our forecast for the general fund services. That's a slight improvement in the position that we reported last month. And as usual, the reasons for the departmental variances are all set out in the report. Of course, if we see such an operational underspend through at the year end, it will certainly help the council in meeting future year's budget challenges. And I'd also say that the figures that I'm quoting reflect that 2.465 million of forecast COVID pressures are covered by drawing on the council's COVID grant resources, so these don't impact in the operational budget position. The figures in the report today, though, do reflect the pay award that was granted to local government staff recently, but they don't yet reflect the impact of the Teachers' Pay Award for 21-22, as that was only very recently agreed. However, we have got adequate budget provision in the 21-22 budget for the Teachers' Award. The forecast outturn position could obviously still change, although we're technically past the 31st of March now. This forecast was based on the end of January figures, and if pressures experienced in February and March vary from what we predicted, or if when we're finalising the accounts, the schools divulge school management balances at the end are different from those forecast, we could still have a bit of movement. And also, it's hoped that the management action that's been taken recently to avoid any non-essential expenditure will continue to increase the underspend at the end of the year. So, you know, we would hope we might even have a slightly better position than what we've been forecasting just now. So I'd ask you to approve the budget adjustments shown, note the latest position, and that we will give you an update on the unaudited year-end position during the month of June. We email out to all elected members at that point.
Thanks very much for that update, Margaret. It's much appreciated. I know that there's a huge amount of work has gone in on everyone's behalf in terms of getting us to this position, and it's good to note that, you know, that there is some positivity within that. Happy to open up for colleagues to comment. Councillor Bamford.
Hi, thanks, Chair. Margaret, can I just ask, in the great scheme of things, it's not a huge amount of money, but in page 17 you mentioned about the pre-5 education, the secondary school education, about not being refunded or under recovery of income due to recharge of PSAs. I mean, it's £56,000 over primary and secondary. So, given the size of the education budget, I know it's not a huge amount. I just wondered if you could clarify. As someone who sits in a lot of the school appeals, I realise how many placement requests we have and how many people come into our education department from other local authorities. Do we usually get all the money that we spend in our schools, to particularly for ones like Isabel Mere and Calabar Communication Centre, where I know the cost per pupil is higher? Do we always recharge that, and do we always get, albeit 56,000 this year, I'm assuming we'll get that back? Is it at the norm that we get it refunded? Because it must be a huge part of our education budget, the placing requests.
Yes, and we've for many years we have recharged other councils for the PSA support for placement request pupils. We get grant funding per pupil for teachers, but it's on a population basis for PSAs, so that's why we have to make a recharge for the PSAs. I'm not quite sure. I know we've got Mark with us. I'm not quite sure why we seem to be struggling a bit more to get all of the payments in from other councils recently. But I don't know whether Mark can enlighten you on that one. But if not, we'll come back with a bit more on the reason for that. But certainly it's something that seems to be a bit more of a problem now than it used to be.
So does the government pay us per pupil for the teaching element of it? We get that straight from central government.
Our grant, the various strands of our grant take cognizance of different things. So the funding that we get towards teachers is based on the number of pupils in schools, but other areas of education spend are based on the number of school-aged children who live in our area. And obviously, if we have children coming in from elsewhere, we're not getting funding on a one-to-one basis for them. So we do recharge other councils for that.
Okay, thanks for that, Margaret. I don't know, Mark, are you wanting to come in?
I mean, I'm happy to go back to the team and see if we can get a little bit more detail for Councillor Bamford in terms of, I mean, there are obviously sort of close working relationships with, particularly in the West Partnership, in terms of those arrangements, because essentially you're talking about children that have got probably quite specific additional support needs, and as you highlighted, Councillor Bamforth, we are able to claim that back. I don't know why there's that gap in terms of the 44,000. Probably, as you say, it's probably quite a small proportion of the overall budget given the numbers and so on. But I'm happy to try and get a little bit more detail, and I can come back to you on that one.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Do we have any other comments? Well, apologies for that, folks. I think there's something wrong with my IT equipment there and losing the signal a bit. Happy to open it up for any other comments. No. On that basis, then, I'll be happy with to note the recommendations that, in the first instance, members note the continued financial pressures on operational services arising from the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's expected that will be overseen. I think I'm in the right paper, yeah. Note the forecast underlying general fund operational underspend of 1.788 million. Members approve service environments and operational adjustments as set out in the notes to the tables on pages 14 to 29, and note the reported probable outturn position that all departments continue to closely monitor and manage their budgets and ensure that spending up to operational budget levels does not take place. In view of the challenging financial outlook for 2022-23 and beyond, directors take action to avoid all non-essential expenditure for the remainder of the year. I'll be happy to note those comments. Thank you, colleagues. Moving on then to item 5, the Flexible Local Authority COVID Economic Recovery Fund, and I believe Louise and Andy.
Yeah, I think Louise is going to lead in this one. Keep it simple.
Okay, thanks. Morning, everyone. As Cabinet will be aware, throughout the pandemic, there's been various short-term funds aimed at supporting response and recovery. So today's paper gives details of a new £80 million fund that was agreed by COSLA leaders and Scottish Government that will be available to us in 22-23. It's called the Local Authority COVID Economic Recovery Fund. So nice, snappy title there. So we think East Renfrewshire's share of this fund is yet to be announced, but the head of accountancy predicts it will be in the region of potentially 1.48 million. So given the scale of the funding and the relatively short time scale we have to use this funding, it's important that we get our plans in order and are ready to move on the announcement of that funding. In late February, COSLA leaders agreed a set of guiding principles for spend, and these included clear links to economic recovery and or low-income household support, and a collaborative approach to sharing best practice, helping businesses to move from a period of survival through the pandemic towards a recovery and growth period going ahead, and building consumer confidence and supporting low-income households to become more economically active. So we've had a look at the research on the impact of the pandemic locally, and our officers have developed a proposed 3-tier approach for use of this fund in East Renfrewshire. Firstly, support to businesses that are more linked to low-income households, so potentially ones where sectors where there are lower paid staff. Support to businesses who've been most adversely affected by the pandemic to help stimulate recovery. So through things like the Shop Local campaign and to help resilience for local businesses. And then directly support to low-income households who've been most adversely affected. So that can be direct support like provision of shopping vouchers, as we've been doing through humanitarian support up till now, and also indirect support such as money advice and rights support and fuel poverty advice. So there's a range of proposals in development currently with using economic development, working with the Child Poverty Oversight Group and also the Local Employability Partnership. But with the timing relatively tight, the Director of Environment and I are seeking delegation to ourselves to work jointly within the spirit of the guiding principles set out here to get relevant initiatives moving. Our first priorities would be to extend the contract of the fuel poverty officer, who's currently only funded until the end of June, and also extending the COVID compliance officer within environmental health for a further year. And the specific advice that came out with the guidance on this pot did refer to that post, that environmental health post, and it's acknowledged that businesses require that ongoing support to remain resilient in the shifting regulations of the pandemic. So that's supported by the government to continue that post on. Concerns do remain about the lack of long-term commitment to support such areas in the face of challenging budget settlements, but given the increasing impact of the cost of living crisis and the continued drive for local economic recovery, this funding is very welcomed. A further report will be brought back to Cabinet later this summer, detailing the allocated level of funding once we know that and how we plan to apply that within East Renfrewshire. So for today, Cabinet's asked to consider and approve the three-tiered approach that's set out in the paper for use of the Local Authority COVID Economic Recovery Fund, to agree in principle the funding allocation for the noted posts in paragraph 7, the fuel poverty and environmental health one, and that consideration will be given to any further temporary resource required to manage the fund as well. And that we delegate to the Director of Environment and myself to make initial commitments within the spirit of the national guidance, and that we'll bring back a further update to Cabinet once the specific allocation is known. Happy to take any questions, thanks.
Thanks very much for that, Louise. It's much appreciated, and I'm sure appreciated by all of those that we're hopefully going to be able to help. I know a huge amount of work has been done on it. It is very much a movable feast. We know the difficulties, not just of the pandemic, and that they are in many ways continuing to give us difficulties and problems, but the ongoing crisis in terms of cost of living, which I think is going to hit people significantly hard over the next few weeks and months. And we know that we're already seeing the impact of that. So it is going to be a very challenging time, and being able to make sure that we get the funding out to those most in need is going to be vital, I think, at this time. Happy to open it up for comments, colleagues. Councillor Bamford.
Me again. Thanks, Louise. It's really good that you put so much work into this so that we can, just start spending once this hopefully £1.48 million comes through. Can I just ask you a couple of questions? In 6.1, you just mentioned there about the support to businesses who are linked to low-income households. I think that's great. I'm just wondering though, will that money, I'm a bit, is it going to local businesses to support them? Because I'm not sure we want to encourage some of the bigger companies to not pay their staff very well. So I just wonder how you will work that, because ultimately who we want to support is the people. I understand we want to support the businesses because we want to keep them here, but I just wonder how that would work if we're talking about large chains and things where they have a lot of lower paid staff. My second question is, well, it's a comment and a question. I'm absolutely delighted that we're getting or extra funding for an extension to the COVID compliance officer, because I know how much the environmental health people worked through the pandemic. I mean, they did carry on with the day job as well as a huge amount of extra work, so I'm delighted at that, and the fuel poverty officer. But in terms of the extra money, the support to low-income households, how are we going to identify them? Is it through our third sector partners? And when you're talking about shopping vouchers, food, things like that, are we also thinking about fuel vouchers given the situation we're in at the moment? Thanks. I know that's a lot of questions, so I'll come back if you want to clarify.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. Happy to bring Andy in and then Louise again if necessary in some of those points. Andy?
Yeah, there are quite a lot of points in there actually. If you look at paragraph 6, the guidance that we've seen so far regarding the fund, it's more economic development orientated. And to answer Councillor Bamford's question, it is about local businesses, absolutely. It's not about large chains or multinationals or anything like that. So that's what we're looking at, about how we can provide businesses in those sectors within East Renfrewshire Council, local businesses with lower paid staff. So I hope that answers your question on that one. In relation to the Environmental Health Officer, I'm very grateful for your comments. Environmental health have been instrumental in implementing a lot of stuff around COVID, and businesses absolutely rely, it's a dreadful term we've used, I think, in their compliance officer. It's not, it's going out there and providing support and assistance to businesses to help them to continue to operate within all of the issues that are still prevalent around the whole COVID thing. So I hope that answers your questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Andy. And Louise, do you want to come in at this point on any of those points, and then I'll bring in Councillor Merrick?
Thanks. Yeah, I'll just comment on the last point you made, Councillor Bamforth, about the how do we identify people in need, and also about the fuel vouchers. So it's very much a partnership approach to identifying people in need. We've got a child poverty oversight group, but also we work closely in partnership with Money Advice and Rights, with Citizens Advice Bureau, Scottish Welfare Fund team, social workers who are dealing with families. So there's very much that sharing of information about people that are in need, and trying to signpost people to the right sources of advice, and trying to make sure that they get in early with Citizens Advice or MART to get that look at what they might be entitled to, and get them on a pathway to helping them in a longer term approach. We have used things like fuel vouchers in the past, and we have been able to provide some of those things, as well as shopping vouchers. We've also used the humanitarian money quite carefully in recent years through the pandemic to think about, well, there are payments that go to people that are on free school meals, and those are made by the government, passed by the government to us. But recently we paid the families that weren't entitled to those bridging payments. We paid people that only get clothing grants and not free school meals. We paid £150 out to each of those children just a month or so ago. So that affected 500 children in East Renfrewshire. So we're trying to creatively look at who's eligible for different pots of funding that are coming out and different payments, and who might be being missed by those, and trying to target them creatively with the funding that we have. So it's very much a partnership approach. Thanks.
Thank you. That's all very reassuring.
Yeah, thanks, Louise. I think it is reassuring that we've got so many partners that we work well with to try and ensure that we can get funding out to those most in need when they need it. Councillor Merrick.
Yeah, thanks for the paper, Louise and Andy, and agree with everything that Councillor Bamforth has just said, the 2 posts and so on. Fantastic to keep that going. That's a big issue. One of the specific issues I wanted to talk about was businesses that are under pressure. You know, some are effectively on their knees at the minute. You know, they're just waiting for the final hammer to fall almost. So, I mean, all donations are gratefully received, whatever source they come from. But I keep thinking we seem to be on the back foot all the time, just sort of fighting fire. We're doing the best we can with what we have, but what about our medium-term business survival? Because that kind of helps with the poverty agenda, because they do provide employment, etc. I know of a couple in particular that are, you know, there'll be more people missing that little bit of extra money that we get in employment, and how exactly are we going to support businesses that are perhaps already in arrears?
Okay, thanks, Colin.
It's a way general worry I have.
Yeah, I don't know about being able to support businesses that are in arrears. That would raise a lot of different issues. But what we are trying to do is identify, we're out there engaging through the business improvement districts and the network that we have, the local employability partnerships, to try to identify businesses that are struggling, to try to understand why they're struggling, to try to get them back in the right path so that they can survive and then grow potentially. So there are some things that are in the back of my mind that we want to kind of have a look at as part of this process. And these would include the STP, that's the Scottish Towns Partnership local gift card, including associated costs, to try to channel any help and assistance through that so that it goes locally. Expand the local shop local marketing campaign. We're looking at pre-employment trades training fund to help people, because some businesses are suffering because they can't get people with trades, the local businesses. Help local businesses, provide some financial assistance towards them becoming living wage accredited, and have an associated marketing campaign about that. Help them to support energy efficiencies and net zero transition, because there's implications for them there. And as another simple example, we're looking at green law now that it's going to be vacated by the Health Service. We're trying to develop a business incubator programme at Green Law with assistance from the University of the West of Scotland to identify, what would I call it, to be honest, probably to try to focus on greater growth, helping businesses that are currently struggling to not only survive but to grow. And I know that's a bit of a potted kind of ramble through what we're actually looking at, but certainly at the basis is the concern that you've expressed, that we have to help businesses, one, to survive, and then to be sustainable for the future. So some of them are looking, it's so complex and complicated. Some of them we're providing assistance and advice with them on how to diversify their product and their service, for example, moving along and aligning with the changes that we've all seen in the market through online shopping, local shopping, all of those different, all of those various things. So it's not just a short-term fix we're looking at, is the conclusion that I would come to. We're looking at trying to provide sustainable business functionality and possibly growth. I hope that answers your question as best.
No, it does. It's again, that's reassuring because the whole range of things that you're working on there. There's no one single answer. I'm thinking of some businesses that are primarily affected because of footfall or because of the change in people's habits, and also people's confidence is low. But there's only so much we can affect that. But I think it's just going to be a slow build back. Very difficult, but what you said is the whole range of things that at least we're doing our very best to.
And I would also say to any elected member, if anybody's gone off the radar or got under the radar, if you have information or requests for advice and assistance from local businesses that you're aware of, don't hesitate to get in touch and we'll engage with them.
Okay. All right, thanks for that, Andy. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks for that, Andy. No, I think it is. It's much bigger than, if you like, COVID recovery, because this touches on a lot of the business needs and the strategies of businesses and how that may well change because of the outcomes and potential differences in how people go about their daily lives and indeed their business because of the pandemic and indeed the ongoing crisis, and whether that be Brexit and the impacts of the much wider issues that are affecting us just now. But we do have a comprehensive number of ways of looking and supporting businesses, and obviously I know the team is working hard to develop that in spite of the additional pressures that's been on them to deliver throughout the COVID pressures and because of the pandemic. But I know that the ongoing work is still there underpinning all of that, and hopefully we'll see the results at the end of that. But it's not an easy task, and there are many facets involved in all of it. Okay, thanks. Then Colin, are you wanting back in? Or is that, no, you okay? Right, on that basis, colleagues, are we happy with the recommendations in the report to consider and approve the three-tiered approach detailed in this paper for use of the local authority COVID Economic Recovery Fund? Agree in principle the funding allocation for the noted posts under paragraph 7, and that consideration will be given to any further temporary resource required to manage this fund. And we delegate to the Director of Business Operations and Partnerships and the Director of Environment to make initial commitments within the spirit of the national guidance and to bring further update to Cabinet once a specific allocation is known and more detailed proposals have been developed. I'll be happy with that paper, colleagues. Great, thank you. Moving on then to item 6 on the agenda, and the Mearns Castle High School sports facility. And Mark, I believe you're covering this.
Thank you, Chair. The report informs Cabinet of the Education Department's proposal to undertake a revenue contribution to capital to allow the Mearns Castle sports pitch refurbishment project to be progressed. So in 2019, a proposal to improve the sports facilities at Mearns Castle High School by refurbishing the current Blaze football pitch and running track with a new all-weather pitch and running track was presented to and considered by the Council's Corporate Asset Management Group. for inclusion in the Council's General Fund capital plan. Paragraph 5 of the paper and report sets out the objectives of the proposed refurbishment, but notably it's designed to replace the obsolete sports facility currently in place and bring the facilities available at the school in alignment with those in other East Renfrewshire schools. It's designed to ensure that there's sufficient physical education spaces to meet the learners' curricular and extracurricular needs, as well as addressing the pressure from an increased role. And then it will also meet the increased demand for access to all-weather 3G football and athletics facilities by local communities and sports groups. So in 2019, the project was scoped by the Council's Property and Technical Services team, which resulted in a capital cost being budgeted of 1.73 million. Unfortunately, due to COVID, the project and the progress of that project was delayed. On the 3rd of March, 2022, the Council's General Fund capital plan was approved by full Council, and that included £1.73 million for the Mearns Castle High School sports pitch. The project has recently been tendered, with the preferred bidders tender being higher than the budgeted amount. The department has carried out value engineering, but the required capital for the project is still 1.94 million, which is above the allocated budget. The additional cost of that project is not unexpected, given the knowledge of other tender processes recently within the council and more widely across local authorities in Scotland. So in order to bridge the shortfall of 210,000 between the budgeted amount and the preferred bid, the Education Department would like to undertake a revenue contribution to capital from the department's estimated underspend in 21-22. This would allocate 193,000. In addition, there would be a minor adjustment from the Education IT refresh of 24,000, and in total that would cover the 210,000 shortfall. As detailed in paragraph 12 of the report, the proposed revenue contribution will not impact on the Council's revenue estimates for 22-23. As have already been considered, the requested revenue equating to the additional revenue budget is associated with the underspend from period 9 to period 10. As required by the Council's financial regulations, where a tender cost or revised estimate exceeds the provision in the capital estimates, further approval is necessary from the Cabinet before it can be progressed. So it's recommended that Cabinet increases the capital allocation for the sports facility from 1.73 million to 1.94 million and approves a revenue transfer of 193,000 from the education budget in financial year 21-22 to help manage the school-related projects in the 21-22 capital plan, therefore ensuring adequate funding in the capital plan for the increased costs of Mearns Castle High School sports facility. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that, Matt. Updating us on that. We know it has been an ongoing issue that has already been delayed, and as you rightly say, I think we can anticipate a number of these papers in the future because of the increased construction costs for a variety of reasons that all authorities are finding across the board. Councillor Bamford.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Mark. I'm obviously very keen for this to go ahead because having had 4 children go through Mearns Castle High School, I am aware how inadequate and how badly needed the sports facilities are. And I understand from other meetings and even just reading the news how expensive things have become and how that's totally out of their control. Can I just ask you a couple of questions though? In paragraph 9, you've mentioned this value engineering and reducing costs by about 60,000 without impacting upon its functionality. Can you explain a little bit? Do you know what that means? Was the school consulted, or is that some design thing that has been done to reduce costs? And the second question I have is, you mentioned the costs, the money where the money will be taken from, and it should there will be money taken from the IT refresh. I know I get complaints from parents and I see near Mearns Castle, so I get where they're coming from about the IT in the area not being optimum. is that going to, I know parents may come back to me and ask about that because they are already concerned about the IT, particularly at Mearns Castle. Is that going to affect their connectivity and issues within the school? Thanks.
If I take the first one, Councillor Bamforth, no, in terms of the value engineering, it's about, I suppose, looking at the various parts of that project. We've not, there were various options considered. We worked closely with Andy's team there, but we didn't want to compromise in any way the integrity of the project. So there were other options that could have been considered. If I give you perhaps a practical example, there was options there in terms of removing the floodlights, and that would have saved further money. However, you know, given the weather that we have and the climate and the lighting within Scotland, that would mean that it wouldn't be usable for large portions of the year. So there's been various looks at that, but there'll be no loss to the school in terms of the overall costings there. In terms of the IT refresh, no, it won't impact on Mearns Castle specifically in that way, and it won't impact on the connectivity in any way.
Thanks, Mark. But can you clarify what kind of things that they're going to save the £60,000 on? And was that purely yourself and Andy's team that decided that? Did you speak to the school about what could be done or what could be redesigned or saved? Because I'm still not quite sure how we're managing to shave £60,000 off it.
Some of it was in around some of the sort of the contingencies that were set up there, and there was agreement that they could manage that within the sort of overall bid and still deliver the overall project. But no, in terms of I can absolutely reassure you, in terms of the athletics track and in terms of the synthetic pitch, there's been no change to those part of the actual project.
Okay, thanks for that, Mark. I think, yeah, the value engineering is about ensuring that we're getting the best price for delivering the best quality services. And it's about working with those who submit tenders. It's about ensuring that we keep costs down as much as possible, but without compromising on what we're actually looking for. And I think that's key. And I know that value engineering is going on in all of the projects that have been undertaken. Mr. Cahill, I think you want to come in.
Just to clarify about value engineering, when we go out to tender, we usually with the client, in this case it would be with Mark in Education, specify what we want in terms of the outcome. So that will include nice to have things. Once it comes back, this happens in lots of areas, once the detail of a tender comes back, and it could be 20, 30 pages long, then staff go through and look when we're over cost at things that we can take out without compromising the functionality of the project. So there may well often we come across some things that are maybe nice to have, but not essential to the project. And what we have to do as well is you have to be careful when you're value engineering that you don't, given the costs and the discrepancy between budget and tender, that you don't start moving things out of the project where actually by reducing the cost, you're not meeting the functionality that you actually required in the first place. Therefore, it calls into question whether the project should go ahead. So in essence, in simple terms, what we do is we just shave things off wherever we can between client and parts, property and tech services, to try to get back and reduce the cost as far as possible without compromising the project. Hope that helps. We do it in lots of different areas.
Okay, thanks for that, Andy. Any other questions, colleagues? No, on that basis, then, are we happy with the increased capital allocation for Mearns Castle High School sports facility from 1.73 to 1.94 million, and approve a revenue transfer of 193,000 from the education budget in financial year 21-22 to help manage school-related projects in the 21-22 capital plan, therefore ensuring adequate funding in the capital plan for the increased costs of Mearns Castle High School's sports facility. I'd be happy to agree with that paper, colleagues. Okay, thank you. Moving on then, item 7, the Afghan relocation and resettlement schemes. And Andy, I believe you're covering this.
Thank you very much, Leader. It's a fairly comprehensive report, as you can see, and it sets out a lot of the background, and some members will be more than aware of it. The report has had to be changed through changes to guidance over a period of time, but essentially the current position is reflected in that report just now. If I could just make some key points rather than going into detail. There are 2 UK government schemes, as you can see from the report, ARAP and ACRS. After considerable discussion through COSLA, for example, the UK government package is available for both schemes for a 3-year period, and they're both the same. The schemes for both those, the support for both those schemes is the same. It's taken us some time to try to review our options. As you can all imagine, it's really challenging given the pressures on our housing stock for 101 other different reasons. We really don't have much housing stock. It's been easier for other councils that have got larger numbers of void properties or difficult to let properties or whatever. We really just don't have that. So what I'm proposing in the report, you'll see, is to rent 4 houses from the private sector and use 2 Barhead Housing Association properties as well, which they've agreed to provide. In essence, that means that we would be able to support 6 families, which could amount to, say, around 24 to 30 individuals approximately. Those individuals will be given the full range of support required. If you look at paragraph 10, that gives an idea about medical, educational and that type of support. We've got a really good track record in relation to what we've provided for the Syrian refugees, as members will remember. There's a working group in place, and we will dedicate our resettlement officer to working with the Afghan families. As an aside, I think it's maybe worth noting that the UK government has been slow in matching the matching process, so matching suitable families to potential properties within our area. So we will start accommodating the families once we can identify the families through the matching process and therefore enter into appropriate private sector leases. From a best value point of view, I think you'll understand I cannot commit the council before knowing numbers and before knowing strongly potential families, not just notional, that are almost guaranteed to come. I couldn't sign private sector leases before that on the grounds that they don't materialise, because there would be a real cost to the council. But anyway, we're working on that, and we're working with the UK government, and we're working with COSLA and the Scottish government. So there are no financial implications. I've checked it all out myself. The scheme is fully funded by the UK government for 3 years, so there are no financial implications for the council. And I'm asking you today to approve the council's, formally approve the council's involvement in the Afghan relocation and resettlement schemes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Andy, for that. I know it is it's very difficult in these circumstances to bring all of it together, but I know, as we did with the Syrian and indeed with Ukrainian families, that we are working hard to ensure that we can provide safety within our area for the families that may well choose or end up having to be with us. I think the difficulty, as we know, and you touched on yourself, is the Home Office and the difficulties around not just placing families with us, but the difficulties in terms of funding, the difficulties in the projects that they announce. And as we are seeing currently with Ukrainian families, tying people into schemes and not necessarily guaranteeing funding is an ongoing problem and something that needs to be addressed urgently. But these are difficulties that are out with our control, but we need, in effect, the Home Office to step up and to deliver for us. And all we can do is ensure that we have the measures and the support in place and do what we can. And it's good to note that this report covers all of those issues in terms of working with our partners, particularly in this instance, Barhead Housing, to ensure that we can deliver for those most in need. Councillor Bamforth.
Thanks. I totally agree with this. I am more than happy to approve this paper. It's just a question, having worked in a previous role with asylum seekers, refugees, and unfortunately the Home Office. Are these Afghan? Oh yeah, Andy, laugh. Honestly, you could write a book about how. Anyway, I just won't go there. Are these families? Will they ultimately? I know we are getting funded for 3 years. Are they termed legally asylum seekers or refugees. I know it's a moot point in this regard, but I'm just thinking of their long-term futures. If we have them here for 3 years and they're settled, and they then have to go into the asylum process, because once they go into that and mayors and everyone else gets involved, we're in a whole other ballgame, and I would be very worried for the families. So I know it's not really relative to this paper, but I just wondered if you would clarify it.
I would have to get back to you on that, Councillor Bamforth. I'm sure I've seen some reference to it. There is so much guidance that you would drown in it, and it changes all the time. I would have to have a member of staff check what the longer term status beyond the 3 years is, and I can get back to you on that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Councillor Merrick.
Yeah, thanks very much for the paper, Andy. Completely supportive, and understand the phenomenal problems that there are with this. It is absolutely disgraceful how long the Home Office, how they took so long and ducked and dived and didn't really seem to know what they were doing, and finally we seem to be somewhere at the minute, but who knows what could change later on this week with that. It's just ridiculous way to treat any human beings. Anyway, here we are at the minute, and we have the best we can. Take the phenomenal points as well. We don't have a lot of spare houses lying about that aren't used. It would be nobody does really, but we do the best we can. I know the Syrian refugees, that was a very big success, I would suggest, overall, you know. But then we have all that pressure about employment, about all the stuff beyond that. But at least we have they're coming to terrific schools in the area, which is a massive help to begin with. But I'm sure they'd all rather be at home in a peaceful country. Okay, but thanks very much for the paper. It's very much appreciated and very supportive.
Okay, thanks, colleagues. If there are no further comments, then are we happy with the report and note the situation resulting in the need for Afghan families to be resettled, and approve the Council's involvement in UK Government's Afghan relocation and resettlement schemes? Are we happy with that paper? That's agreed. Thank you, colleagues. Moving on to our final paper of the morning, item 8, granting of commercial leases policies and procedures. And again, Andy.
Thank you, Leader. Again, conscious of the time, pretty comprehensive report. I'm seeking approval for a clear and transparent policy on granting commercial leases or licences of council assets. I do accept it's a bit technical and a combination of policy and practice, but this will provide guidance for businesses and third sector organisations, and it will go on the website if approved. So what I want to do, I want to be absolutely clear and transparent about the 3 stages so that everyone understands them before they engage with the council or during their engagement with the council. So there are 3 bits where we're crystal clear: how we market and allow inspections of properties, how we then grant a lease or licence, and ultimately how we might terminate a lease or licence. It also provides clarity for staff regarding operational day-to-day management, and there's a clear defined process around how we go around this. So really, it's comprehensive. The policy in Appendix 1 explains absolutely everything in great detail, and I'm simply asking the Cabinet to approve the policy attached to Appendix 1 this morning and allow us to put it up on the website at the earliest opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Andy, and thanks for the brevity in terms of what is a very complicated area, as you've highlighted. I think when it first came in about community asset transfer and the news headlines make it look as if it's a fairly simple, straightforward task, but clearly there is a lot more involvement in that, not only from the council's point of view, but also from those who may be taking on a property and how it's then managed in the future. So there is a whole range of tasks, as you have outlined, that's involved in that, and a whole range of processes that we need to go through to ensure that, one, that there is value for money, but equally that the community is getting an asset that it is able to maintain and keep up with. And so it is a huge area in terms of these leases. It's a massive area that's going to grow in the future, I have no doubt. but happy to take any questions on that if anyone has any. No. On that basis, then, colleagues, I'll be happy to approve the policy and procedures for granting of commercial leases as outlined in Appendix 1 and support the upgrading to the ERC webpage to add a page for council commercial assets and promote the council's policy on leasing these assets to help businesses and communities understand the procedures required to let a commercial council asset. I'll be happy to note those recommendations, colleagues. Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, everyone, for the work going into preparing the papers for this morning and for your attendance, colleagues. I know it's a very busy time for everyone concerned, so thank you all for that. It's all much appreciated, and I'm sure that our residents equally will see the benefits and appreciate that as well. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, colleagues.
Thank you.
Bye.